So, hello. Welcome to
Hello.
today's interview. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, I will. My name is Lily Holloway, and I'm a poet and writer from Tamaki Makaurau. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them, and I'm currently studying postgraduate English at the University of Auckland.
Yes, and is it honours or masters in postgrad? Or is it just a
Honours.
postgrad? Honours. Ooh, exciting. And is it in creative writing?
No, I'm doing it in English literature, and my honours thesis is on queer contemporary poetics in Aotearoa. Yeah.
Oh, that must be really cool. And how is that going? When is your thesis due?
It's due on the 15th of December.
Oh, that's so soon. How's the writing
know.
going? Am I allowed to ask how the writing is going?
It could be going a lot better, but we're gonna get there. We'll get there.
So how did you get into writing poetry?
So I think as a kid, I wrote a lot of kind of creative writing, a lot of poetry that I don't remember writing. So my mum sends me texts every now and then of writing that she's found in old school journals. And like, you know, they're pretty similar to what I write now, except my spelling's gotten a bit better. But the first time that I really started writing kind of with earnest was in my first year of undergraduate English, because I took an undergraduate creative writing paper with Selena Tusitala Marsh, and she was just phenomenal. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And she was really, really encouraging. And from that point on, it's been something that I've kind of really enjoyed doing.
Would you say one of Selena's work inspires you? She wrote Dogs Under My Skirt, right?
That's Tusiata Arvia, but they're good friends. They have
the creative circle in New Zealand is you just turn in a circle, and that's the entire circle of creative, because it's so small, it's so wild.
Everyone knows everyone, which is why, like, it's so cool. I was on a Zoom call with Selena a few weeks ago about my dissertation, and we were doing a shut up and write session together, and she was like, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited Tusiata Arvia. And I was like, that's ridiculous.
Of course I don't mind.
I was like, like, this is so cool. I'm going to be telling everyone about this, getting all of the clout for that.
What is a shut up and write session? Is it literally you shut up and you write in a lot of amount of time?
Yeah, so I think before lockdown, it would usually be something you'd do in person, and you'd meet up at a library or a cafe, and you'd all kind of sit there and do work together and hold each other accountable. But because it's lockdown here at the moment, we're still doing Zoom shut up and writes. So you, like, you just commit to like a Zoom of a certain length, and you can leave your camera on or turn it off, and you just work kind of like parallel to the other people.
Yeah, it's like that concept of body doubling I've heard in a lot of ADHD circles. It's like, I just need someone, they don't even have to be doing the same thing, they just need to sit in the same space as me, or else I won't get what I need to do done.
That's my mum had to sit with me, like, if she ever wanted me to tidy my room. Like, can't do it if someone else is alone. Can't be trusted.
And for these shut up and write sessions, do you end up sharing your work, or is it the sort of thing, I'm just going to write?
So it depends. I've most of the ones that I've done do have a sharing work component to them, and I think that that's kind of part of the whole kind of building of community, like encouragement of each other. But there's no pressure. I've never been in a shut up and write session where they've made you share what you don't want to.
And a creative writing session and a creative writing class are totally different. Like similar atmospheres, but totally different at the same time. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, definitely, because I guess with a creative writing class, there's kind of this there's always this expectation of being marked for it and having to produce a certain quality or a certain amount of work. And when you kind of come out of that, it's quite nice because you kind of can do it on your own steam and in your own way.
Yeah, definitely. So you got a book out and with calls that I saw. I like pointed it out to my friend. I was like, it's actually like, that's my friend. Like I know them through my old friend at high school, and they just wrote this book. So how was writing that?
So I had I had like a general goal that I wanted to put out a collection, and there's this competition called the Kathleen Grattan competition it's like a select amount of pages or number of poems. It's for a sequence of poems, and it's run usually every year, and it's a national poetry competition. And I'd prepared this manuscript for it, and then I read the details, and it was like, we're not doing the competition this year. So I'd prepped this manuscript to send away. And I was like, well, what do I do with it now? And so I sent it away to a few people, and Anna Jackson, who edits AUP as a series and was featured in it, like I think maybe in the first iteration of AUP New Poets back when it kind of first happened, she kind of like replied to me with a rush of enthusiasm, which was really cool. And she emailed me while I was in line at Countdown, and she was like, I'd love to have this as a part of the AUP series. And that was just, I was really taken aback, because I was putting stuff out there kind of with the expectation that I was going to get a lot of rejections, because that's kind of the nature of submitting work as well.
Yeah, definitely.
But Anna is just so incredibly like passionate and really encouraging. So it's always real wonderful to run into people like that.
Yeah. And because again, the creative circle in New Zealand is so tiny, it is really unfortunately about networking and people who you know, and just also just believing in your work as well.
Absolutely. So I think that if you're somebody that has never had someone go, hey, that you've actually got talent in this, you're far less likely to get published, which means that you're far less likely to feel like you can submit stuff to get published. It's kind of like self-perpetuating.
Oh, totally.
I feel really lucky to have always had kind of English teachers who have been like, that's something that you can do with your life. So I think that it's really part of what I find really difficult, and have found like much more difficult in the past, is submitting and getting rejected, because it feels so personal.
Yeah, especially because poetry is, even writing in general, but poetry especially is so personal. It feels like you're giving pieces of yourself away when you write these very personal poems, and then it gets rejected. You're like, oh,
and like sometimes, usually they won't give a reason why, but sometimes they'll give you specific feedback that often feels quite confronting, and you'll be like, but I really like that part of it. But I think the more I've had to really push myself to keep submitting, and keep getting rejected, because the more you get used to it, the more you can kind of just brush it off. Maybe it's not the right place for your work, or maybe your work's not completely ready yet, or maybe you need to just kind of keep it in a folder for a while and come back to it. But I feel like that's been a real big learning curve for me, is kind of like not taking that rejection so personally.
And how did you get to that stage from taking it so personally to sort of taking it on the chin?
Well, I think I was when I first started submitting, I got rejected quite a lot, and I was putting them out to a lot of places, and it did feel kind of like, is this something that I should pursue? I don't feel very good at it. But I think that I was just really like, no, this is something that I want to do. And, I'm writing anyway, so I'm just going to put these feelers out there. I'm going to submit to things. And if they want the pieces, that's great. But if they don't, I'm not going to let that stop my creative process. And and then it gets to a point where you're like, oh yeah, like that's just part of writing a piece, and like finding a space for it. It is about submitting it to places and having it be rejected. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, that makes total sense. Do you have any favorite poetry writing exercises? Because at Porirua Library we have a young writers group. I run it, and these very eager girls, and they love it. We haven't moved on to poetry just yet. We're just working through genre at the moment. But do you have any like meaty exercises I could probably do, or even just generally for young poets out there?
Yeah, definitely. I think that my exercise that I use all the time, and that I feel like is beneficial for anyone, is kind of like, I don't know that it's ever had a name, but I think of it as kind of like magpie poetry. So like taking a poem that you really love, and whether that be because of its content, like its thematic content, or because of its form, like its structure, and being like, what is really working with this poem, and then replicating it in your own way. So that might mean, a way that I do that is I'll pick a poem that I really love, I'll write it out with gaps in between each line, and I'll write like my own response to that line in between each gap. And then eventually I take away that initial poem, and I'm left with something that I can then work with. But that exercise can look like anything. Like I've recently written a listing poem that was like directly kind of because I had encountered a listing poem that I really liked, and I was like, what's really working here? What do I really like about this, and how can I kind of, I guess it's kind of like an exercise that changes every time in that way, that you can, like it depends on what poem you pick.
That's so broad, and I like that because there's so much room as well.
And I think it encourages reading as well, and that's kind of the main thing. And so, if you ever encounter something that you're reading and you're like, I really like that, and I like what that's doing, put a bookmark there and like come back to it, and kind of, and sometimes my response to that poem will be like really disconnected from it. It'll just be kind of, I'll be trying to do the same thing structurally, or like I really like the order of the words, but sometimes it'll be like a thematic kind of response, like I really like how it's examining a certain idea, and I'll be like, oh, that kind of relates to this in my life, and what if I wrote about that experience?
That's a great answer. That's a great exercise. I might do that when I get home, actually.
It's super exciting, because then you like encounter something and you'll be like, oh, I'm saving you for later.
Gonna put it in my pocket. Do you have any favorite New Zealand poets?
There's something about New Zealand poetry that I really, really love, and that I kind of want to study, to the point where that takes up most of my reading space, is New Zealand authors, even in other genres other than poetry. But yeah, like I have so many New Zealand poets that I really love. Like I mentioned Selena Tusitala Marsh, like she was kind of the first, one of the first poets that I ever really had encountered in person, and that was like really blew me away. Other poets that I really like, Chris Teese, Courtney Sina Meredith. I think Courtney Sina Meredith's first book, Brown Girls in Bright Red Lipstick, maybe was the first collection I ever bought myself. Mostly like it's a beautiful little book as well. I was like, oh, I've got to have that. Tusiata Avia, and I've got like friends that write poetry that I really admire, like Leah Dodd. I'm not sure.
No, I know Leah Dodd. She's my friend.
I really love her writing. a New
Rebecca
Zealander
Hawkes is really good as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say Rebecca Hawkes, who every time she writes about cows, I'm like, yes,
Rebecca, write about the cows.
Vanessa Krofsky. So reading Vanessa Krofsky's selection in AUP New Poets 6 was what made me be like, I want to write a collection of poems. There's a poet called Sophie van Wardenberg who lives in the States currently. Yeah, there are just so many. Esa May Ranapiri is so excellent. Yeah, I could go on forever. There's just kind of a never-ending list. Yeah.
Yeah, especially in New Zealand is rich with poets.
I'm one of the founding editors of Eel Mag, which is forthcoming.
Yeah.
Which is for queer poetry from Aotearoa.
Which is so exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And we've just had a grant for our second edition.
Nice.
So that's really exciting and means that we can kind of pay people to make work.
To write work. That is so cool. So who are your co-founders?
So Nathan Joe,
mm-hmm. who
is like a really phenomenal kind of performance poet and playwright. His work's just kind of like blows me away. I'm really excited to be working with him. And then Shania Pablo, who is someone that I've done kind of writing with before and who has coached a lot of winning spoken word teams. My thinking with the group, with the kind of like the editors, is that we've got somebody who's like, I'm like very much primarily a print poet, and then we've got someone that kind of works across both mediums but also has experience like very strongly in other genre, and then Shania is very much, most of their experience is in slam. And I think with queer poetry, it would be really kind of not representational to have a journal that didn't in some way kind of offer a space for slam poetry or spoken word poetry, because that is such kind of like a big part of queer like written culture, I think.
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's the perfect marriage between art and performance. And slam poetry is very cool.
Yeah, so we've opened up submissions, and it's for written work, but also people can submit videos or audio of them performing.
Oh, nice. And is it all ages or is it a particular age group?
All ages. Yes.
Sweet. I will drop that in the Discord chat with the girls.
Yeah. But you know, there are so many places. Like I'm sure that you've told your group about Starling, and I think there's a journal called Toy Toy.
Yes, yeah, we hold a lot of Toy collection just actually in the library, and I've recommended the girls that as well. They're very sweet. We have meetings every Friday afternoon. Actually, this Friday is our first in-person meeting, and they were very excited.
Wow.
But some of them will be like, I didn't do the exercises, because I'll send them maybe exercises like 2 weeks before the actual next meeting, and I'm like, I didn't do it. I'm like, it's fine. And then I give them like 30 minutes to write. I mean, the things these kids come up with is amazing.
Yeah.
And also very, like, kind of the stuff I was writing when I was like their age, but also theirs is so much better than the stuff I was writing. Mine was just very glorified fan fiction.
I think fan fiction can be poetry. I think that fan fiction gets a lot of flack, but I think I don't know, it's how like most of my friends got into reading.
Oh, totally. And reading and writing, totally. And also most of those fan fictions are like actual published books, which are crazy.
Yeah.
Like the new one going around, I think it's called The Love Equation or something. It's like a new romance novel, was a Raylo fan fiction, which is crazy.
That's
oh
ridiculous.
My god!
I
know. Oh my god! The cover. Just look at the cover, and you're like, "You look like that was from Star Wars." So, like it was from Star Wars fan fiction. And so, what are you reading at the moment?
Reading or writing?
Or both?
I'm doing a lot of reading for my dissertation that's coming due, but I'm in terms of poetry, what am I reading? Emma Barnes's I Am in Bed with You. I'm also I'm trying to read a bit more creative nonfiction as well, because I feel like sometimes my work will like straddle both poetry and creative nonfiction. And so I just bought Madison Hamill's collection of essays called Specimen, I think it's called. But a lot of the reading I do at the moment, because I'm kind of quite I'll say overwhelmed by my dissertation. A lot of what I'm reading is kind of online journals and kind of online, I quite like reading a good compilation of poets as well. It's a bit like listening to a mixtape. Like you can either listen to like an album or a mixtape, and sometimes I do feel like reading through like one person's work in one kind of sitting, but other times I'm like, it's so fun to kind of be introduced to new people and new writing.
What a great analogy.
I don't know, I think a lot of people, when they think about poetry, still think about the level 3 unfamiliar text exam. But yeah, I think that like it's really important to know that your poetry can like look like anything, and it doesn't have to be any sort of way, and it can be really messy, and it like, you know, people I find myself often quite afraid of like writing a bad poem. Like I've had this kind of idea instilled in me that, you know, when I write, it has to be good and it has to like be like immediately good. But I think that you know, that's just ridiculous, because nothing ever comes, you know, nothing unless you're like, I don't know, you've got a divine gift. Nothing like not everything that you write is going to come out fully formed or like come out in a way that other people like. And so you have to kind of like be able to be like, yeah, you know, I'm going to write it even if it's crap. And that's like a totally fine way for a poem to be. I'm writing it because I'm like, you know, practicing my skills, or I'm writing it because I want to get this idea out there, or, you know, like for fun.
Totally. I think that is the whole wanting to get a mark on what you've written, and that the whole assumption something has to exist in order to get a mark or in order to get validation. Some things just exist. And sometimes they're bad. And that's like okay.
It was a huge learning curve for me, because I've constantly, like as a kid, was real keen on validation all the time about everything that I've ever done. And so you kind of like, you grow up doing art in a context where it is getting marked constantly, and it has to be a certain format. And then you kind of graduate high school and you go into university, if you go into university, and it's kind of similar. And then you come out of university and you're like, none of that structure exists anymore. That was just like very specific to
that
education.
How many drafts do you go through before you get to a place where you're like, okay, this is ready to submit to a magazine?
I think it depends. I think that my answer will be different from other people's answers just because of the nature of writing. But I think for me, it even varies piece to piece. Like sometimes I'll have this idea and it'll be stewing in the back of my head, and I'll have like a couple of notes on my notes app for it. And then I'll just sit down and kind of flush it out and work on it until it's done. But other times I'll write a draft of a poem and I'll be like, okay, this isn't quite there yet. And at that point I need to put it down and go and, you know, touch the grass and live my life for a little bit and then come back to it. Like sometimes I have to forget about it a little bit, and then I'll be like, oh, I'd forgotten that I'd written this draft. And then by the time that I come back to it, I've kind of got different perspective. I'm able to come at it with like a fresher eye, and I'm better able to cut out or like be quite ruthless with it, if that's what the poem needs, because in the moment you feel so, when you're like writing that draft, I get so attached to each bit of it. I'm like, no, that's so precious, I love that bit, I could never imagine that piece without that bit. And that's why they say that phrase all the time, kill your darlings, like in relation to writing. But sometimes a poem will have like, I'll like have like 2 drafts, and other time it will have 10 drafts, and that's kind of, it depends on how difficult the poem is being with me. So yeah, like a lot of the time, like I'll be like, I really like this poem, but I don't feel like the form is quite right yet, and I'm not sure what the form is going to look like. And so you'll play around with a bunch of stuff, and then at the very end you might be like, actually how it was at the beginning was the best. You kind of have to like go through all the motions with it.
First time is the best time. Doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes it does.